chapter 14. And Kiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and masons, and carpenters, to build him a house. And David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, for his kingdom was exalted exceedingly, for his people Israel's sake. And David took more wives at Jerusalem, and David begot more sons and daughters. And these are the names of the children whom he had in Jerusalem: Shammua, and Shobah, Nathan, and Solomon, and Ibkar, and Elishua, and Elipeleh, and Nogah, and Nepheg, and Japhia, and Elishama, and Beladah, and Elipeleh. And when the Philistines heard that David was anointed king over all Israel, all the Philistines went up to seek David, and David heard of it, and went out to meet them. Now the Philistines had come and made a raid in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of God, saying, Shall I go up against the Philistines, and wilt you deliver them into my hand? And the Lord said unto him, Go up, for I will deliver them into your hand. And they came up to Baal-perazim, and David smote them there. And David said, God hath broken my enemies by my hand, like the breach of waters. Therefore they called the name of the place Baal-perazim. And they left their gods there. And David gave commandment, and they were burned with fire. And the Philistines yet again made a raid in the valley. And David inquired again of God, and God said unto them, You shall not go up after them. Turn away from them, and come upon them over against the mulberry trees. And it shall be, when you hearest the sound of marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then you shalt go out to battle. For God is gone out before you to smite the host of the Philistines. And David did as God commanded him. And they smote the host of the Philistines from Gibeon even to Gezer. And the fame of David went out into all the lands, and the Lord brought the fear of him upon all the nations. All right, let's go back up to verse 1. Now we remember yesterday that we was bringing the ark back home, and this is going to be at a period of time after that. We're going to find out this Chronicles just kind of overlays and skips through a lot of the document. We'll touch a few stories here and there. This is a period now when David's kingdom is being well established, and we're going to find out David's going to build him a house, or actually the king of Tyre, this king of the rock, this king Kiram or Kiram is the noble born. It means those born of nobility, but Kir, and it comes from a root word of Kir, and that means this white cloth, even those of the white cloth, these nations of even the white cloth. He is the king of Tyre, and we remember Tyre is that great merchant city. And I'd like to make a little correction. Yesterday, I believe I said the sons of Samuel went out with the ark and lost it, but it was actually the sons of Eli. And we're going to pick it up here with David in verse 1. And Kiram, the king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and masons, and carpenters, to build him a house. And we'll find this king, this Kiram, this one born of nobility, even that represents this white cloth, this nobility of white cloth, that being of pureness, this king of Tyre. And we had probably heard of David and his reputation growing in the land, so he decides that he's going to make friends with David, or to make acquaintance, and he sends masons and these cedar trees. Cedar trees is something that was used in for their longevity. Cedar trees and evergreen, and it represents that of longevity or everlasting life even. And the cedar tree as well is a wood that lasts for a long time. And these masons, those who will build, will find out this house for David. 2. And David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, for his kingdom was exalted exceedingly, for his people Israel's sake. And God had established David as the king over Israel. David is that one who's going to represent the chosen one, just like that's what David means. Because the Lord does call him by name, and God did establish him king over Israel, those that do contend with the mighty one. 3. And David took more wives at Jerusalem. And David begot more sons and daughters. And David took more wives. He already had several, and already had several children that were born even in Hebron. And he took more wives at Jerusalem. Jerusalem's that place of peaceful teachings, or the teachings of peace, literally. And David begot sons and daughters. We'll find out there. And now we're gonna list these sons and daughters of David that were born in Jerusalem. And with that, we should go read probably Deuteronomy 17:17. And then we would find out that, God's told in the day that you do make yourself a king, he shall not number to himself many wives. And this would be a commandment that God gave to Moses. 4. And these are the names of the children whom he had in Jerusalem: Shammua and Shobab, Nathan and Solomon, Ibkar and Elishua, and Elipeleh, and Nogah, and Nepheg, and Japhia, and Elishama, and Baaladah, and Elipheleh. And that those would be those children that were born to David in Jerusalem, in that city of the peaceful teachings, or the city of the teachings of peace. Those that were astonished, that means to be amazed, or the backsliding is given a gift. It's given a peace, or this peace covenant. He chooses the mighty one of wealth, the mighty one who escapes with brightness, this coming forth, this sprouting forth, this springing forth, this shining, this sending out of beams even. My mighty one listens. Baaladah, you see, that's that Lord of knowledge, or that Lord image of knowledge. We're going to find out about all these Baals they had, these little Lord images they carried around with them. The mighty one that escaped, because that is the mighty one that escaped. 8. And when the Philistines, changing subjects now, these of them were the children that was born to David in Jerusalem. And when the Philistines heard that David was anointed king over all Israel, all the Philistines went up to seek David, and David heard of it and went out to meet them. And this is during a period of time when David's going to be fighting now. He's going to begin to fight a lot of the wars for Israel. And we'll find out the Philistines have heard of David. They've heard David's been anointed as the king over Israel, and they're going to come up and make war with him. These Philistines have been like a thorn for hundreds of years now, that God has been using them to come up against Israel. These Philistines are the drifters, these wanderers. And they were descendants of Noah. They drifted away from God a long time ago. 9. Now the Philistines had come and made a raid in the valley of Rephaim, and these raids are something we would have found out in the book of Judges and through there, that these raids they would often make. They would often come and steal all the crops about harvest time in the valley of the Rephaim. And Rephaim is that valley of the giants. It represents, but these giants, these are the great healings, those of great healings. It's a plural. And David inquired of God, saying, shall I go up against the Philistines, and wilt you deliver them into my hand? And the Lord said unto him, go up, for I will deliver them into your hand. And David asked of the Lord. See, that's one thing Saul never did. He never inquired of God, but David did inquire of God, saying, shall I go up against these Philistines? Shall I go up against these drifters, these wanderers? And God said, go. I will deliver them into your works. 11. So they came up to Baal Perazim, and David smote them there. And David said, God has broken my enemies by my hand, like the breach of waters. Therefore they called the name of the place Baal Perazim. And this place of Baal Perazim, we'll find out it means Baal. This was a great image they had created for themselves back at that time, this half man, half God, half bull, half man thing somebody had whittled out or chipped out of a piece of a rock. It had everybody in the world falling down to it. It was a Lord image, and that's what it represented. It Lord. That's what Baal means. And it was at Peretzim, and Peretzim means, it's just like Peretz. See, he was one of the ancestors of David. Peretz is Peretzim. It's a plural of the breaking forth, these breaches, like David said, it's like a breaching of great waters, even like a breaching of great understandings. And that's why they called the name of the place Baal Peretzim, because it's where this great breach of waters, even this great breach of breaches, see, of these Lord images. 12. And they left their gods there, and David gave commandment, and they were burned with fire. And they left their not a gods there, you see, and these would be all those little Lord images they carried around in their pockets. Everybody fall down to it at a certain time of day, probably. And there they left them. See, they left them there. They laid them down because they realized, see, God was in the midst. God was working, and these were not a gods. And David gave a commandment, and they burned them with fire. They burned them, we're going to find out, with judgment. 13. And the Philistines yet again made a raid in the valley. And these Philistines, one more time, see, they're going to make a raid in the valley, even in that place where the represents this place of flesh, represents this crack or this crevice people fall into. They can't get out, these Philistines, these drifters. 14. And David inquired again of God. And God said unto him, You shall not go up after them. Turn away from them, and come upon them over against the mulberry trees. And David asked again of God, and that which is required to inquire of God. And God said unto him, You shall not go up after them. God said, Don't go up after them this time. Turn away from them, and come upon them against the mulberry trees. And this word mulberry trees here, this word is bakah. It doesn't mean mulberry trees. It has nothing to do with the mulberry tree. For the life of me, can't understand why anybody would translate this mulberry trees. And what it refers to is a weeping. It literally means weeping, seeing the tears, to witness the weeping, this pouring out of. And it could possibly refer to a balsam tree, because when you break the branches of it, it oozes forth that, even that which is going to seal off the end of the branch and heal it. But it literally means weeping. 15. And it shall be, when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then you shall go out to battle. For God has gone out before you to smite the host of the Philistines. For God has gone out before you. We'll find out. And that's who is actually doing the fighting. That's actually who's doing all the conquering. It shall be that when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, once again, these mulberry trees, but when you hear the sound of this marching, and it sounds like marching, this wailing coming forth, this weeping, you shall go out. You shall go out to battle, because you know God is going out before you against the host of these that drift away from God. 16. And David did as God commanded him, and they smote the host of the Philistines from Gibeon even to Gezer. And David did just like God commanded him, and they did. And they smote the Philistines, these drifters, these wanderers, it means wanderers, from Gibeon even to Gezer. And Gibeon is that hill city. It's that city, Gibeon, means hill. And Gibeon is that city on that hill. We'll find out they made them a long time ago. They're the ones who went out and made a covenant. Remember, God said, You shall not make covenant with those in the land. But they dressed up, took out the pity portion, made it look poor and all this from far land. That's another story. All the way to Gezer. Gezer is that portion. Gezer means there's a portion. It's like a piece has been cut off, it's separated, it's been set aside for something. 17. And the fame of David went out into all the lands, and the Lord brought the fear of him upon all the nations. See, and the fame of David goes out, and we remember that word, that fame, this one that's going to be made known. He's going to stand out in prominence, in possession of. See, that's what God's doing. It's the work of God. See, it goes, God's bringing the fear of all the nations. God does it. See, God does it. God sets up the servant. God uses the servant. Servant works for God. That's the way it works. We're going to move forward. Chapter 15. God says, turn and return